notes about the One Lab Summit before we begin. As a reminder, this session is being recorded. And if you encounter any technical issues during the One Lab Summit, please email the One Lab inbox for support at onelab@cdc.gov. If you have questions throughout today's events, insert them into the Q&A function below using the Q&A icon on the bottom of your Zoom panel. We'll answer questions at the end of each session, and we have posted a link to the live captions in the chat. If you are using the captions, please be sure to keep the caption window open in addition to the Zoom meeting. I'll now turn it back to Alicia Branch, our One Lab Network lead, to introduce our next speaker. Alicia?
Thank you, Blanche. Seems like my background has disappeared. Oh, well. I'll read the CDC external presenter disclaimer and then introduce our second speaker, Dr. Christine Bean. Slides may contain presentation material from panelists not affiliated with CDC. Presentation content from external panelists may not necessarily reflect CDC's official position on the topics covered. And I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Christine L. Bean. Christine oversees experiential learning programs as the Chief Learning Officer at APHL. These programs include fellowships, internships, leadership, academic partnerships, and the training and workforce development programs to develop and deliver training for APHL members and laboratory system partners. She joined APHL in October 2021 after serving as a director of the New Hampshire Public Health Laboratories from January 2005 to October 2021. She was the APHL president in 2013, served on numerous APHL committees, and was a clinical laboratory improvement advisory committee member from 2007 to 2009. Our next speaker is Dr. Christine Bean.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I'm really happy to be here today. I'm going to bring my slides up and share my screen. So let me do that. Here we go. Just one second. No, why I can't get to my, hold on. There it is. Okay, here we go. Welcome everyone. I'm really pleased to be here today to be part of the CDC One Lab Summit, and I'd be remiss if I didn't share in my best wishes to everyone for a very happy laboratory week. I was reflecting this morning on my 42 years as a laboratory professional, and just a couple things about my background and experience. So I began my laboratory career in the clinical laboratories as a generalist medical technologist back in those days, and then became a microbiology specialist in the clinical laboratory for 8 years I spent before joining the University of New Hampshire in the medical laboratory science program there, where I taught microbiology, lab management, and a number of other things, setting up clinical sites for students for 15 years. When an awesome opportunity opened in New Hampshire when the state public health laboratory director retired, we had worked with them for clinical internships, and I thought this would be a really exciting next step for me to step into the field of public health. So I've had a really interesting career in laboratory science, and would recommend it to anyone tomorrow. It's been a great successful career for me, as I've been able to really develop skills and evolve over time. So it's one of my ways that I really like to pitch the career of public health laboratory science. So happy Lab Week. Today, we're here to talk about personal effectiveness as a leader and setting personal boundaries. So what I will begin with is a discussion about what are personal boundaries. So what are these? We're really talking about setting limits and for ourselves, both personally and professionally, within relationships, personal relationships, work relationships, expectations that people have of you in a very demanding laboratory science role you have. And one of the things you'll learn today is that a person with healthy boundaries can say no to others when they want to, but are also comfortable opening themselves up to having close relationships with people. And the fence here is kind of a metaphor about what you let in, what you allow, and really working today on thinking about how you set personal boundaries. It's not an easy thing to do, and it's something that is really a habit that you can improve and practice as a leader, and will improve your effectiveness in that role. So it's very critical for maintaining your well-being and sense of control. Many times in the laboratory profession, we know we have things occur we don't expect they're going to happen. You have emergencies, you have outbreaks, you have surges beyond your control. And how are you going to manage that? To thrive in a professional environment, we must be able to set boundaries. So we're going to talk today about challenges with personal boundaries, and then strategies to help everyone set those boundaries for themselves. So who has challenges with boundary setting? Just raise your hand if you have challenges with that. Many of us do. And what we know is, I see lots of hands and thumbs up. We're being honest with ourselves here. It's not easy to say no to something. We're, as professional people, as scientists, as women and men, we want to do everything. We want to do all the work that's required, and that leads to having some challenges with what you're going to be able to do and what you can't do. Let's first look at the caption here on the right, which I think is really important. In the end, as a leader, you are always going to get a combination of two things: what you create and what you allow. It's up to you. So setting boundaries, both at work and at home, will help other people understand how to work with you, right? If you don't set them and people don't understand how to work with you, you're setting yourself up for never getting a work environment that's conducive to what you require to achieve success. Over time, people will learn how to work with you and start to fit in with your patterns and standards. It's almost like you're training people to understand your needs. Both setting boundaries at work and home will help you reduce the amount of time you spend reacting to other people's desires. So let's stop being as reactive and maybe begin being more proactive. You'll be able to work more on your own terms rather than playing by someone else's rules. So common boundaries challenges. So what are some common challenges? And I'll give it some examples. Obviously, these are not all inclusive of boundaries that exist. There's many, many boundaries, but one could be a lack of a clear understanding of the difference between what is urgent and what is important to maintain a healthy work-life balance. In your work setting, okay, in a clinical laboratory, urgent is a stat order. Okay, that's a clear message, and that's very useful to you. That is your urgent work. That's your urgent CBC to run. Versus what is important to finish by the close of business today is to get all your chemistry profiles out and get them reported to the physicians. Procrastination or being a perfectionist. You know, and many times as scientists, we want perfection. We work very closely with some of our teams to say, when is it good enough, right? When is good enough? It's not easy to accept something as good enough. and being a perfectionist could become a challenge. Is the time we spend on projects proportionate to their importance? This is an important one to think about. You may be spending too much time on a certain project that's not as important as something else that should be taking the priority. And, we could have a whole nother session on delegating, because that's an important skill for people to develop as well. Maybe your focus should be on those projects with the highest importance, and have a team of people working on those that might be less important to you. Multitasking, boy, are we all guilty of this. We're in an environment where many of us work remotely, and we multitask to try to do sometimes 3 things at once, hopefully not more than that. But multitasking steals our ability to focus and drains us of our energy. And we recently had a retreat with our teams at APHL, and we had a guest person that came in to do a talk on us about collaboration. And I really loved something that she said, and I had never heard this: turn multitasking into multi-asking. I thought that was a really, really important way to think about things. Okay, so let's transition to look at some of the boundaries. Number 1 is time management. So boundary 1, time management, how you use your time. So for those of us that work in an office or in a remote environment, you can use your calendar to do that. And I know not all of you work in an office. Many of you are in those laboratories. So I'll give you a couple examples of that too. But if you use a calendar and work in an office, use it to your advantage. Book work time for yourself, which is focus time to complete specific tasks. Block it off. I do it on my calendar on a regular basis. Block that time off. When I was in the public health laboratory, I was in an office, and I would use my door with a sign that said, please do not disturb, if I was writing grants or reports. I didn't want people knocking. I did have an open door policy, but there are times you need to set a boundary to say, I'll be free after 1 o'clock. The way you manage your time is sacred. Use your time effectively. Using it effectively is critical to maintaining a sense of control over your day and improving your productivity. So I know many of us are guilty about trying to do it all and doing too much. And in some fields or professions, there are limits to the amount of hours people can work in a day, right? A pilot can only fly a plane for so many hours or so many miles. Why is that? It's unsafe if they do more than that. So there's some examples where time management is done for you, where you cannot work longer than this many hours if you're in a surgical unit performing surgery. So thinking about using time management. The second one is the ways you work. So setting the time you start and finish work. What are your work hours? Do your work hours meet your needs? You have kids to drop off at school? That's your priority. You've got to get the kids dropped off at school at 7:30. Your work hours begin at 8 a.m. And those are your hours. You can set the environment in which you work. So for some of us, we may have a remote environment, which may be a little bit more flexible, but the environment in which you work is very important and conducive to setting boundaries. So are you working in an office with people, or there was a time I was working in an office environment in cubicles. If anybody's ever had cubicles, you need to have cubicle etiquette so that you have the opportunity to have time to concentrate and get your work done and not have people bothering and interrupting you in that cubicle. For those who've been there, you know what I'm talking about. Always keeping in mind, you won't always be able to work exactly the way you prefer. But if you don't set boundaries, you can be sure you will never be able to. Okay, boundary 3, privacy, involvement, and sharing of information. You have a right to some degree of privacy, even in the workplace. And we want to think about how you want others to be involved in your work. If you share every single piece of information you have, over time, people will expect that. So you may want to have projects where you're the lead on the project and you have others involved, but you bring them in when you need their assistance, and they may not have to be involved in every aspect of that project or know everything. If someone is hovering over you and trying to know every part of everything that you're doing, it might sometimes feel like you're being micromanaged, or it could maybe feel like there's a lack of trust for what you're doing, which is not a good work environment. So you need to be careful. With some people, if you give them an inch, they certainly could take a mile. The fourth one is about behavior. So this is an important one, and it's talking about if people are rude or disrespectful to you and your team members, this needs to be corrected. And setting boundaries around this. Without doing that, people will simply continue to act as they please, which sets a precedent for future behavior. If someone steps over the line, you need to be able to name the behavior and say that it isn't acceptable. We're not always good at this, giving feedback to people. While there are many models, what I'd like you to consider, and I'm going to go in a little bit more detail on this slide, using a model called the SBI model. And this comes from a book that we'll put into the chat as I go through this slide, called Feedback That Works, a tool that could be really useful to you. I was able to learn about this book when I was in the National Public Health Leadership training maybe 10 years ago. And this is put out by the Center for Creative Leadership. It's a very good reference for you to look for anything that has to do with leadership training. But this is around the SBI model, and I'm going to go through these S, B, and I. So in order to give feedback around behavior, the first thing that you need to do is to capture the situation. So what this means is be very descriptive and very specific about the situation, location, and time something occurred to create a context for the person that you're giving feedback to. So be very specific about describing the situation that occurred. Number two is the behavior. Describe the behavior or actions. And what you want to do is to use verbs to describe actions, not adjectives that describe your impression of those actions or interpretation of behavior. So you're not judging the behavior, you're using verbs to describe the behavior. And I'm going to give you an example here. An adjective is very subjective, as you can imagine, and a verb is very objective. So here's an example. You were rude to the client. Now, that is very subjective, right? It's an adjective using the word rude. You're interpreting what their behavior was. You were rude to the client versus you raised your voice in front of the client. That's what the person did. It's a verb. It's subjective, saying the situation, the behavior. And thirdly is the impact. So explain the impact that that behavior had on you and others that were present, if people were there in the situation. So what you experience as a result of the behavior. The person receiving the feedback you give cannot easily dismiss the personal experience that you had from their behavior. So let me give you an example of this. This is actually from the book, but I revised it. So here's my example. Kevin, in the meeting this morning with the new vice president, you kept your voice at an even tone, even when she questioned your team's numbers. The team and I were really at ease with your delivery. So you describe the situation, when, what happened. This can be used in a positive manner, doesn't necessarily have to be used negatively. You describe the situation, Kevin, in the meeting this morning with the new vice president, the behavior, you kept your voice at an even tone, even when she questioned your team's numbers. And the impact, the team and I were really at ease with your delivery. Now imagine you've given someone this feedback. Probably Kevin will repeat this behavior and then at the next meeting you're at. So take a look at this resource. I have it at the end of the PowerPoint as well. So just before we transition to strategies for setting boundaries, I'll just share this quote and let you take a minute to read it. Okay, so let's look at strategies for setting boundaries. The first one is to identify your most critical boundaries. So start by choosing the most important areas of your work that you want to protect. Think about that. What are the most important areas of your work that you want to protect? It might be my time, right? Maybe it's my time that I want to protect. Maybe it's my ability to make decisions on projects. But start by choosing the most important areas you want to protect. Sometimes that could be your pain points. You know, what bothers you the most? You're all thinking of things. So think about that. Identify those most critical boundaries. In general, you're not going to be able to set boundaries for every aspect of your work. It's not necessary, but it's only in certain areas where you find people taking liberties and pushing your buttons, right? Dumping work on you that you didn't know was coming. How could they do this again? They did this last month. They're doing it again. I'm sure that's happened to people. You know, things coming at you that you don't expect. People making priorities or emergencies out of situations that you don't know are coming, and you may be thinking their emergency is certainly not my emergency. So your ability to manage your time might be one of your most critical boundaries. So the first step is to identify what those are. The second is take a position. So take a boundary position. And be clear and be firm. Think about this with your children if you have kids at home. Take a position, be clear, be firm. You know, if your work hours are not before 8 a.m., your work begins at 8 a.m., then you're not available before 8 a.m. Take a position regarding the situation at hand. It really means defining your stance on the problem, and this will become your boundary position. You can't set a boundary if you don't have a clear position. So be clear. And the third is to automate. So in some cases, there are ways that you can automate your boundary. And if this is true, it's a very useful system or process that can help you with that. So let's think of some examples of that. In many cases, you might have a ticketing request system. So you at APHL in our IT department, there's a ticketing request system. If I have a problem with and I need IT to solve that, I complete a ticket or a request. And on that request, I will explain the urgency. It asks you to explain, is this an emergency? Is this an urgent need? Can this wait till tomorrow? So you could possibly automate that boundary if possible. In clinical labs, one of the things I thought about for clinical laboratories would be turnaround times. You've established turnaround times for your tests. And most of the time you meet those turnaround times unless you have an instrument breakdown. But that's one way that you can automate your boundary. Our turnaround time is 6 hours for a routine CBC. It's only been 2 hours, but we will have it to you shortly. But being able to automate is powerful, and it can be quite achievable for you. And fourth is be consistent. So consistency is a huge part of setting boundaries at work. You don't want to be, you know, saying your hours are 8 to 5, and on occasion you let people make meetings with you at 7:30. You have to be consistent, so because it trains the people around you to behave in a certain way. I'm not saying that you will never will be reachable before 8 a.m., but consistency means your typical workday begins at 8. My typical workday ends at 5. My team knows that. Of course, I'm reachable in the evening if they need me. I have a cell phone, they can call me, but I'm not sitting at my computer until 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night. Certainly more of a morning person for people who know my work style. And then also resolving conflicts. I think this is important. So the ability for you to set these boundaries may be incompatible with the needs of people around you. You certainly are not trying to be difficult. You're trying to manage and set some parameters around your work and your style. So as you begin to set these boundaries, you may start to see that there's potential areas of conflict. And what I want you to do is to view these as opportunities. So these conflicts are a perfect opportunity to have an open discussion about what you need and why you're trying to put boundaries in place. So if you have situations that come up, I think about COVID, where, you know, maybe everything was off the table for setting some boundaries, but if you don't ever set them, you're not going to have any limitations on the amount of time. And the conflicts are certainly an opportunity to have a discussion, and people will understand and improve communication where you describe what people are, what with people you work with, what you need. So maintaining a personal boundary by reducing stress and time management and organizational techniques. So let's take a look through this list. So I'm not going to read through it all, but read through and see if there's a couple that resonate with you. So to reduce your stress, there's ways that you can pick things from this list. So we're planners, planning for each day. Some that resonate with me is time management, and using organizational techniques to really be more mindful of managing, developing good time management and organizational techniques. Another that resonated with me is using humor to lighten your mood and recharge. I think it was National Humor Day yesterday. So during COVID, as an example, you know, where you want to reduce your stress, you know, find people to be around that lighten your spirit, right? Be kind to yourself and others, say nice things out loud. Oh, you know, good job. Pat each other on the back. Practice optimism, I think, is a nice one, and positive expectancy, and try to be supportive of each other. So one of the things you can also do is to create a buddy system. So in a laboratory, you may have coworkers who would be willing to switch weekends with you if you're on weekend coverages, or do an extra day for you when you're going to be willing to do that for them at a later date. So I saw that in the public health laboratory when we went through surges, not just COVID, but before that, we went through other emergency events, some that went on for long periods of time. Like one was a hepatitis C event that was ongoing for 1 year of time. And people needed to just be free and be off on a weekend or take a day off. And what we would do is say to them in words, like speak the words, we will not call you this weekend. You're off, you go do something fun, and we will cover you. We've got your back. So use a buddy system and make sure that people feel like they have support in their work environment, because the work we do is can be stressful at times and can be a lot. So going forward, really, in many cases, when you set a clear boundary about something that is important to you, people will simply respect it. In many cases, they will. If you set boundaries for yourself with family, personal relationships, professional relationships, people will respect you for doing that. Also, as a leader, you will set an example for your peers and your staff that they may be willing and able to do that as well. If you don't do it, they're certainly not going to do it for themselves. So be an example for others. Start setting boundaries at work for the aspects that are most important to you. That way you can craft a working environment that helps you feel calm, in control, and empowered in your leadership role. And when you think about this, it's a really good strategy to use to help retain people. We need to be able to retain people in the laboratory professions and not have them burn out and leave to change careers or go to some other lab setting. This could be a useful tool for that. And remember, always remember, no is a complete sentence. So practice saying no, practice, not in a rude way, but you have a right to say no. One of the other times I did this talk when we were talking about time management, you don't have to accept every meeting invite you receive. You know, there's a reason why there's a tentative button on that reply. Maybe you'll be able to, maybe you won't. You don't have to say yes all the time. So for one of our final activities, here's what I'd like you to do. Write a note to yourself about what you will commit to doing to set your personal boundaries. Write it down on a sticky note or on your notepad that you have next to you. Write it down. And if we were doing this in person, what we would do is have the audience write this on a note card, and we would mail it to the participants a month later. It's a pretty useful strategy to do, to say a month later, you go out and get your mail. Oh, there's this letter to myself, and stop and make you think about how are you doing with that commitment? Because if you don't set boundaries for yourself, very few people will do that for you. So having healthy boundaries is certainly a form of self-love and self-respect. So practice these techniques, be a role model for your laboratory and for your peers. Some of the resources that I mentioned here are available to you. I would definitely suggest taking a look at the Center for Creative Leadership website. They have very useful tools, webinars for all kinds of leadership topics that could be helpful to you. So we'll go to questions, and let me stop sharing. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So again, we'll take a few minutes to answer as many questions as possible. If we don't get to answer your question today, we'll do our best to answer it. Respond via email. That's if you hadn't submitted it anonymously. If you have any questions after today, again, send them to the OneLab box. It's onelab@cdc.gov. So let's get started. Let's see what's the first one. This is a good one. What are your recommendations for sharing negative feedback using the SBI model to someone in a higher position than you are?
It's a very good question. So the SBI model, I would say, first of all, practice it. When I first learned the model and the tool, it's a good tool. I practiced it at home on my husband without him knowing it. Practice, right? I mean, think about these things. It doesn't come naturally to us. So practice a little bit on your family, practice on some of the people at your level in your job before you practice it higher up. Once you master the tool and you know how to do it, you're using verbs, you're using adjectives, you're describing the situation. People will respect you for being willing and able to have it. It's a constructive discussion. It's not judgment. It's not adjectives. It's not pointing fingers. It's describing this was the situation, this was the behavior, and this is the impact that behavior had on me, on my team. What I would say is I feel that I have a responsibility to bring this forward and inform you that this happened, right? Because if you don't do that, think about the impact of not doing that.
Right.
You want to change behavior and have people learn and understand what the impact is. If they don't understand the impact of behavior, they'll never change that. So practice it first.
I found that writing it down and standing in the mirror saying it helps.
Good idea. That's a great idea.
Boundary setting is sometimes more difficult for others than the person setting the boundary. How do you prevent reversion to previous behaviors?
That's a good idea. Be consistent, right? The only way you can prevent reversion to previous behaviors is to be consistent. Don't give up, right? If someone, you know, if it doesn't seem to be working, you don't want to give up on your, boundary setting because someone's not abiding by it or their behavior is not changing. Just be consistent, be firm, be clear. Don't be rude. You don't have to be rude. Being firm and being clear is not rude. It's being constructive and having that, giving that feedback, and don't give up.
Great. Let's see. How would you deal with boundary placing in a work setting where the power dynamic kind of force you to be agreeable?
Okay. So you have a boundary dynamic going on where you feel like you're being forced to agree. Interesting.
Because the environment is agreeable.
The environment is agreeable. It's like a groupthink environment and everybody's going along with it. Well, some of that depends on your confidence level in yourself, right? So the group may be an agreeable group. Well, then you may raise your hand and say, I don't want to be the naysayer at every meeting, but I'm going to bring up this point that we should consider. So you're not pointing a finger at someone saying you're wrong, you're rude, to just say, it might be useful to consider this, or, different strategies that way. Unfortunately, if that's true, you don't really have a good group. What you want to do is bring groups of people together that have different ways of thinking about things, so you get a good outcome from a decision. So I don't know if you can change some of the members of the group, or maybe work with some of those team members on that group on the side to have a private discussion before your next meeting.
Great. Well, this is good. How do you handle the anger and aggression that comes from not pleasing everyone?
That's a good question. So people hopefully don't get too angry with you or aggressive with you for not pleasing them. So in a work environment,
It's dangerous.
I would say, if people are angry, you may want to just you're opening a door to communication. Remember that, for explaining what your needs are and have a discussion. So anytime you can open a door to a discussion and communication, it could lead to a good outcome because someone will understand you better. So hopefully they're not so angry with you that they're yelling at you, but they may disagree with you. And you have an opportunity to explain why you have a boundary set a certain way.
I think this next question is something that we've all experienced. As a new grad in the lab, I made myself available early in the morning and late in the evening that my supervisor took hold. How can they go about setting more reasonable boundaries from the expectations they've created early in their career?
Okay. So someone new in their career is available all the time, it sounds, right? Early in the morning into the evening. Well,
In there, I'll have.
you're not being paid for those hours, right? We all do more than we should. You're not being paid for those hours. I mean, we have to set limits. People cannot expect you to be on the job or available 12 to 15 hours a day. It's not sustainable. No one can do that. And if people begin to expect that you're going to continue to do that, you have a problem there, because you're not setting the boundary on having privacy, having your own life and commitment. So you have work to do with setting that one way or the other. You're either going to start early and end earlier, or start later and end later. So it's up to you. You know, you're the one who has to set that boundary. And if you're not willing to do it, people will allow you to work 15 hours a day. It's too much.
All right, so someone wants to know if you've implemented this model with your team and if you've had any issues with implementing the model.
The SBI model.
Yeah.
We used it a lot in the public health laboratory, because I found that many of our laboratory supervisors really could use a tool to be better at giving feedback to their staff and to their peers and to their managers. So we used it a lot. It's something that you can do as a group and think about and practice it, like scenario practicing. And I think it worked really well. I think people got better at feeling more comfortable with giving timely feedback. You certainly want to do it in a timely manner. Is more effective to do it right away. You know, and as a leader, as a supervisor, someone overseeing people, you need to encourage people to do this. So one example I had was, we had an issue in our central receiving area in the laboratory. And someone from that area came to my office, which was fine, you know, and explained a situation they had in central receiving. And it was kind of a personal situation that I would not have been aware of because I didn't work down there. And I said, you know, I'm willing to help you if you need my help. But to me, the best model, or the best way this should be handled, it would be for you to say something to this person. You work with that person, you're there every day. If that person thinks that you've come to me and told me this, they're going to wonder, like, who else have you told? And it was kind of a private situation. I said, the best thing would be for you to have a conversation with this coworker and explain your concerns about their behavior or the situation. And that might change things. And that was a better strategy. So people got better at doing it with some encouragement and some practice.
Well, this person wants to know, how do you utilize the SBI model for more passive aggressive mannerisms or other behaviors that may not be as verbal or explicit?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you might see people with nonverbal communication that's not, you're not happy about, right? People rolling eyes, or I see that even in Zoom meetings. It's much more easy to see, right? And I don't think people even realize they're doing it. So, you know, when you see that kind of passive aggressive behavior, they're not saying anything, but oh, here she goes again, rolling eyes, right? You've got to do something about it. You've got to say something, not there, maybe not right on the Zoom meeting with everybody on there, but take an opportunity later to follow up. Explain, you know, when you're on these Zoom meetings, when you're on the Zoom meeting this morning, and you rolled your eyes, I didn't understand what, you know, what you were so concerned about, and I wish you'd be more willing to talk about that with me. So following up on that and opening the door to have a discussion about it would be useful.
I think we have an eye roller from this question. They said, sometimes I need to take a step back so I don't speak in the heat of the moment. What is a reasonable amount of time to wait to utilize the SBI technique without losing impact?
That's a really good question. So you certainly don't want to, I don't know, I don't believe people should react in the heat of the moment, because you haven't thought through what your best strategy is. You don't want to wait till next week. You certainly don't want to wait till someone's performance evaluation in June to be discussing these things. That's not fair. That's not equitable or fair, because people deserve to get feedback on their behavior so they can improve themselves. A reasonable amount of time, in my view. My father taught me well. He was a very, very calm, professional person that said, always think about something overnight. You know, you might have some clear thought about your strategy or words overnight. Your emotions calm down. You know, you've got a clearer head. You're not mad anymore. And then you can have a normal tone discussion. You can use verbs and not adjectives and not yell, but it's tomorrow. It's not next week. It's not at the end of April or, you know, May or June on a performance eval. Give yourself an overnight. I think that's always a healthy strategy.
This is a good one. Someone wants to know what was the most difficult boundary that you had to set, and how did you set it effectively?
That's a good point. I don't know if it's time, probably time during COVID, I think. Yeah, let me use that as an example. And it may not necessarily have been for myself because there was no boundary I could set during the COVID. It was just on, right? But you know, we used our staff, we rotated people, we had people working 7 days a week, every day was on. We had a manager on weekends, we rotated managers on weekends. And what I would do would be to have one Wednesday remote day, at least to have a day at home during those weeks, so you could kind of regroup and find that. But probably the most difficult boundary I had to try to set with those in leadership roles at the state level was our laboratory staff could not continue to work 24/7 and go on and on through this. It was not healthy. We didn't have enough people. We contracted for people. So how do you set limits when you don't have a lot of depth in certain areas of your laboratory function, like IT or your, you know, IT administrators, clinical labs have that, lab information systems, hospital information systems, we call them a lab information management system at the state level. I had one or two deep, and the lead person was a young man with a young family. And I'm like, we cannot continue to keep calling this person all weekend, every weekend. This is just not sustainable. And making that boundary and setting it, and people were telling me I must give them his phone number. And I said, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it, because, you know, he's going to quit the job. And, you know, setting boundaries for others is sometimes even harder than for yourself. For people to accept, but I was very protective of them, and because I knew their limits. I knew them, I knew the workload, I knew the stress they were under, and really trying to have people understand without getting mad and angry about it, that there has to be a limit set on what the expectation is for these people 7 days a week. That was very difficult for me.
Great. We'll take maybe one more question. Let's see. What is the best way to set boundaries for a person who is not in leadership? In other words, how do you avoid the other duties as assigned when the duties infringe on your boundaries?
Good question. So you're not in the leadership role, and other duties as assigned just keep coming at you, right? They just keep coming. So, you know, probably speaking with your supervisor and explaining what your work is, what your role is there, and that you can't keep doing them. Maybe be somewhat flexible to say you're willing to do some of these things, but you cannot continue to accept all these duties as assigned, especially many times they're coming at you without warning, right? Oh, here comes another one. You feel like you're just being put upon and put upon and put upon, and there has to be a limit that's set for that. So communication is key, no question about it.
Well, thank you so much for reminding us to set some clear personal and work boundaries. I'll turn it over to Blanche.
Thank you, Alicia and Chris.